The Morin Academy is a 21st century agronomic university. We draw inspiration from the life and work of Peter Morin, co-founder along with Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker Movement, as well as from various intellectual and practical engagements with other currents of thought. Morin envisioned agronomic universities, places where people could learn about life, culture, agriculture, science, and religion together. And he envisioned houses of hospitality, places that, quote, bring the scholars to the workers or the workers to the scholars. These tenets are at the core of the Morin Academy's mission.
Well, so today I've got Caleb Owens here just to tell us a little bit about the class he's going to teach. Coming up right around the corner is going to start on August 12th, so that's 4 days from now. So now's the time to go ahead and sign up one way or the other. It's called The Sermon on the Mount Over the Centuries from the Early Church to Christian Anarchism. And it's going to go on for 4 consecutive weeks. So welcome, Caleb, and thanks for teaching another class for the Morin Academy. And I just wondered if you could kind of just talk about your course, like what inspired you to want to offer this course and kind of what the structure of it will be.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me back to teach again. The Sermon on the Mount course, as I've kind of imagined it, comes most directly out of a term paper I wrote last semester for a class. It was my directed reading on patristic theology, and I spent a lot of time thinking about Augustine's commentary on the Sermon on the Mount, which, as we'll see in the course, became probably the most influential commentary for the next 1,500 years or so. And I think in that process, I was also brought back to many of the things I was thinking about, 5-6 years ago when I got involved with you guys, and met Emily and Spencer and got connected to the Catholic Worker Movement. At that time, too, the Sermon on the Mount was kind of a critical re-entry point for me back into Christianity and into Catholicism in particular. Obviously, something that was very important to Dorothy Day and her influences. And so I think, it's not a text that ever gets old or boring. It's, always worth revisiting. And I think the course will be a good opportunity to survey some of the important questions it raises. So,
right, yeah, the Sermon on the Mount is in Matthew. It's the book of Matthew 5-7, and I went through it this morning again because you forget how long it is, how long it goes on. It's what is it? It's probably like the lengthiest quote, right, of Jesus in the New Testament. Would you say that's like continuous without any breaks where he just continues to teach?
Yeah, maybe. It's funny, the edition I have here, it's the New King James Version. And every time Jesus talks, the print is red. And as you can see here, it's just sustained red for several pages. And you don't see quite that much continuous, speaking anywhere else. So it is long.
Right.
Yeah. Which makes it hard to, I think, construct a course around. As I was thinking about the sort of syllabus and rethinking it, I'm like, we really could have done 4 weeks just on the Beatitudes, right? And that's, of course, going to be a focal point in the course. Or you could do, a different course each week just on a different little chunk of it. We are going to take things in kind of recklessly broad strokes. and just swallow it whole and see what happens. So,
all right. Well, I've got the schedule up here, and I don't know. No matter how I personally, Caleb, I think I actually love courses that slow way down and take one little chunk at a time.
Yeah,
and maybe that's something we need to think a little bit more about in the future is how we might be able to do that. But I felt like that. You cover a lot of good ground, some of which I haven't really had the chance to explore, particularly weeks 3 and 4 there, especially the Reformation interpretations, the difference, like what they made of it. I'm really interested to hear about that. And then the politics of the sermon. When it comes to the politics, well, maybe just give us a hint, like on the Reformation interpretations first. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, kind of thinking about my own relationship to the Sermon on the Mount, if we were to make a kind of crude distinction between like a Protestant reading and a Catholic reading, kind of a stereotypically Protestant reading might say, this is a demonstration of the impossibility of perfection in the absence of grace, divine assistance. And therefore, you can use that kind of reading to support a sort of sola fide, by faith alone, no works righteousness sort of ethic, right? And that's what I was raised on as a good little pious Lutheran. I was taught to read this on the one hand with an eye towards its full kind of severity and moral demand, but only insofar as it points you towards a kind of dependency on grace, right? And
because there's no way you could do this without it. Like you read it and you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can even come close to this, and that's why I have to rely totally.
It's an impossibly high ideal, right? Whereas a more stereotypically Catholic reading is going to say, no, do your best to do this, and of course expect to fail along the way, right? But this is a genuinely attainable ideal that you ought to be striving for, and your salvation just might depend on it, right? And so again, I'm drawing very crude generalizations here. You see all of this on both sides, and it's all going to kind of actually go back to the questions raised in week 2, where we look at Augustine's commentary in particular, which is very famously where he kind of expounds the spiritual interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount that really kind of becomes normative for the subsequent reception history. And so take language that sounds kind of concrete and material, whether we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:7 or its counterpart in Luke, the Sermon on the Plain. Blessed are the poor, as Matthew puts it, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are the hungry, right? Language that straightforwardly sounds very material into a kind of sensibility like my own. It's very informed by the Catholic worker movement and so forth. This all sounds like yes, blessed are the poor. And Augustine's going to actually spiritualize all of this and read the Beatitudes in terms of the kind of ascent of the soul towards God, right? So blessed are the poor in spirit. This corresponds to a virtue of humility. Blessed are those who mourn. Well, no, not those who literally mourn, but those who, are experiencing the impermanence of finite things and therefore turning towards the eternal realities of God, right? And so on and so forth, right?
Yeah,
Peacemakers
it does have the effect of sucking
those who make peace in the world, but internally a properly ordered soul, right? And I won't get into this now. I do think that traces of the sort of material reading endure in Augustine, especially his treatment of blessed are the merciful. You weigh his spiritual reading against some of his sermons on the sermon, and it's very clear that he's not abandoning the kind of earlier tradition of a more, you could say, radical reading of parts of the sermon. But nevertheless, you get this spiritual reading that then becomes influential for later Catholics and Protestants alike. And so that's kind of a mouthful there. But as we're going to see, we're covering a lot of ground, but the same themes and moves interpretively and so forth are going to come up again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of interpretation that we went down, it kind of sucks all the, I guess, the action out.
Yes.
Like the requirement that you try or that you strive for perfection, which, when you do strive, or when you like take those standards seriously, I think what some people experience anyway is like extreme feelings of inadequacy and guilt, right? And that this might be, in my mind, like why people steer away from taking this seriously. And some of this is like really harsh, like these passages on adultery and divorce that, like just the idea that, anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Some of these things are just, like harsh, I guess I would say.
And for sure. Yeah. And I think one of the things we're going to kind of wrestle with in the course is, this is supposed to be liberating. This is supposed to be kind of moral teaching that frees oneself to live, in a better way and so forth. But it can also sound like very severe and almost authoritarian and kind of oppressive. And of course, if you don't read it carefully and then you put this in the wrong hands, it can become that. And so what are the lines between a kind of crass literal reading and maybe a more responsible figurative reading, but then in that figurative, more metaphorical reading, how do we not lose the concrete import? The big division we're going to look at again is the kind of material reading versus the spiritual reading. Is this all just kind of an extended metaphor for, spiritual liberation, or is it kind of a more concrete program for Christian community, right? So yeah, that's all going to come up, I think, again and again. And it's where we're going to kind of land with that last week on the politics of the sermon.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to know a little bit more about that. Without giving too much away, can you tell us kind of some of the avenues you'll take in that final week? Like, because I would imagine if you tried to apply this teaching to politics, it would be challenging, right? Like really, it would make things different.
Well, I think it's a fitting place to end, considering where we begin. The conversation in the first week is going to kind of locate the sermon in the context of Scripture and in relation to, the Old Testament and so forth, but also in the context of Roman antiquity and a sort of political order that's very much at odds with the world imagined by the sermon. The words "blessed are the poor," "blessed are the meek," etc., are pretty much antithetical to the kind of aristocratic culture of ancient Rome. As we're going to see, that's a bit of a reductive narrative. We're going to look at other philosophies very much alive and popular in the ancient world, like Stoicism, that actually, have a lot of kind of alignment with some of what we read in the Sermon on the Mount. But nevertheless, imagining a very different world in its own time, and I think in ours. And of course, this is why thinkers who, again, I think are very familiar to the Morin Academy audience, Tolstoy, Dorothy Day, of course, were so drawn to it because, you think about what the Sermon on the Mount's inviting you to do, even just going back to the Beatitudes, it's inviting you to see in a fundamentally different way, right? To privilege things that are systematically overlooked under consumer capitalism, late modernity, and so forth. It's asking you to behave and think and love nonviolently in a culture that privileges violence, to suppress anger and, lust in a culture that really feeds into those things and promotes them. And so when you're thinking about alternative community in the present, the Sermon on the Mount, for many thinkers, has, I think, had a lot of appeal. And so with those kind of final thinkers, Dorothy Day, Tolstoy, and then we're going to kind of reluctantly spend some time with John Howard Yoder, because he's sort of a unavoidable voice in this sort of milieu. We're going to turn back to kind of, after spending some time with the spiritual readings, return to a more material reading of the sermon, and then see where we land with all of that, and kind of think about the role that the Sermon on the Mount might play in the revolution, so to speak, that Dorothy Day and Peter Morin imagined, the revolution of the heart and of the new world within the shell of the old, right? And so hopefully, if I've succeeded here, we kind of end up convinced that the sermon can do two things at once, right? Inform a kind of spiritual revolution and have material consequence in the world.
Yeah, well, I will be there. It sounds really good. And just remember, folks, it's coming up this Wednesday at 7 p.m. U.S. Central Time. And usually our sessions run about an hour and a half. And it will continue on the next 3 Wednesday evenings. If you want to learn more, I will put a link to this webpage in the show notes, and also to Patreon, because the best way to access, well, really the only way to access this and other courses is through the Morin Academy Patreon. We have an option for you to purchase the course if you want a one-off kind of sample of what we do. This is a good way to get that. Or you can become a patron and giving us some ongoing support. We have multiple levels, but at the $5 level right now, you get everything recorded. For $10 a month, you get everything recorded and you get access to our live sessions like this one. So I'll put the links to all that below. And I really do appreciate you coming on just briefly to let us know about the course, and hopefully we'll get some interesting conversations going.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, the more the merrier. I'm a high school teacher at heart, so I prefer input from the class rather than just the kind of one directional. And I think I'm going to need input, when you're covering 2 millennia of reception history, that you're going to have some gaps. Part of why I'm teaching some of this is because I'm interested in learning some of it, so we're here to learn together. I don't come as any kind of expert, and I hope that we can get some good discussion and thought out of it.
All right, thanks. Well, I'm looking forward to it.